She'll be remembered as a country music legend, but Dolly Parton, who has died aged 80, was much more than that. She was an artist and a humanitarian.
4 days. That was the gap between Dolly Parton promising she was still healing, still working, still unfinished. So many things left to do. In the morning, she died at 80 in a Nashville cancer ward after a fight her family would only call brief, never naming the disease. 16 months earlier, Carl Dean, the husband the cameras almost never saw, was already gone. She admitted she had ignored her own body while watching over his. So the $650 million, the wigs, Jolene 9 to 5, 200 million free books, none of that was the ending. Under it was a one-room cabin, a Greyhound, and $20. Executives who laughed her out of the room, a mentor who owned her contract, a depression she almost didn't survive, and a line of graves that followed her from the Smoky Mountains to a crypt beside Carl. If you only knew the smile, this is the part they cut. Hear what it cost her to become America's sweetheart. And I Will Always Love You will not sound like a love song anymore. Chapter 1. Dirt poor and taught to be ashamed of it. How does a barefoot child from a one-room cabin in the Smoky Mountains become a legend the whole world claims as its own? What did she have to spend to get there? And why, after 6 decades in the light, were the earliest wounds still open on the morning she finally ran out of time to close them? To answer that, you do not begin with the wigs or the theme park or the song that outlived her. You begin in weather. You begin in a winter that did not care who you would become. January 19, 1946, Locust Ridge, Tennessee. Dolly Rebecca Parton arrived as the fourth of 12 children in a house that was less a home than a held breath. There was no electricity to argue with the dark, no running water to make cleanliness a habit instead of a labor. No insulation between the family and a mountain cold that could lay a skin of ice on the inside of the glass. Robert Lee Parton worked tobacco and construction until his hands split and still came home with too little. He could not read the world that was already judging him. He could not write his way out of it. A.V. Lee sang the old Appalachian ballads over a pot of beans when meat was a rumor, filling stomachs with melody because melody was the only thing that reliably showed up. That was not poetry then. That was supper. 12 children learned the geometry of scarcity before they learned their letters. 3 or 4 to a bed, quilts pieced from flour sacks, the print of some vanished brand still ghosting the seams. In the deep of winter, you woke able to see your own breath, and the first task of the day was not dreaming. It was enduring the minutes until the stove remembered how to be warm. Dolly would say it later without decoration, because decoration would have been a lie. They were dirt poor, not humble, not simple mountain folk as souvenir shops would later prefer. Poor in the blunt sense that 2 nickels had nothing to rub against. Poverty, though, was only the climate. Shame was the weather that got inside the clothes. At school, she stood in line in dresses stitched from what the house could spare, and shoes that had already surrendered their toes to the road. Other girls arrived in store-bought fabric that held a shape. She felt the heat climb her neck before she owned a word for humiliation. Classmates did not bother with kindness. They called her trash. They laughed at the homemade seams. They taught her, without ever meaning to be useful, the first hard law of her life. It is possible to know you are poor and still not know you are supposed to be ashamed of it, until you catch the way people look at you. That look did not stay on the playground. It followed her into every dressing room and every boardroom that would later pretend it had never existed. She would wear rhinestones like armor for the rest of her life. And still, somewhere under the sequins, a child in a flour sack quilt was waiting to see whether the room would laugh. And yet the cabin was not only a wound, it was also the first radio she ever needed. A.V. Lee's voice moved through wood smoke and beans. A grandfather who preached Pentecostal fire shook a small church until the walls seemed to answer back. Music in that family was not a hobby. It was currency, the one abundance that did not have to be rationed at the table. By 7, Dolly was already scratching lines onto scraps with broken pencils, a child trying to trap feeling before it evaporated. By 10, she was standing in Knoxville Radiolite, a voice too large for the body that carried it. At 13, she walked onto the Grand Ole Opry stage in a dress the family had made, the fabric still smelling faintly of home, and the applause sounded like a door cracking open on a house that had never had enough doors. Even then, the poverty did not loosen. There were still nights of cornbread and beans. There were still evenings when Robert Lee sat with his head in his hands, a man crushed by the arithmetic of mouths. Dolly lay awake and made a private treaty with the dark. She would leave. Not because she loved them less, because staying would mean becoming another forgotten girl on the ridge. A story that ended where it started. "I had to get out," she said years later. "I knew if I stayed, I would drown in that poverty." So the day after high school in 1964, she did not linger for a softer goodbye. 18 years old. A cardboard suitcase that already looked tired, $20 folded like a dare. A guitar. Her mother weeping in the yard of a life that could not follow her onto the bus. Dolly Parton boarded a Greyhound toward Nashville with the mountains still in her accent, and the shame still in her throat, and a vow that was almost violent in its simplicity. She would not die in the same small room that had taught her how little the world thought she was worth. She believed talent would be enough. Nashville was about to teach her the next chapter of the same lesson. Chapter 2. Nashville did not want her until it could own her. She thought talent would be enough. Nashville let her believe that, just long enough to break it. The Greyhound dumped an 18-year-old with $20 into a city that forgets names for a living. She slept in a roach apartment so small turning around was a decision. She ate crackers and stolen ketchup. The hunger was not new. It was the cabin, still sitting in her stomach. Every door slammed. Too country for country music. Voice too high. Songs too simple. Honey, go home. The worst nights were the ones they let her sing. She poured the mountain into 3 minutes and watched them shrug. Alone afterward, the old verdict came back in a nicer jacket. You are not enough. She did not go home. In 1966, she signed with Monument because a bad contract still looks like oxygen when you are drowning. Dumb Blonde hit the chart in 1967. Her name finally existed. The money did not follow. The label wanted her sanded down. Less mountain, more product. She was on the radio and still broke, still one Friday from disappearing. She cried herself to sleep and almost chose the smaller life. Go home, marry a local boy, call the dream a fever. Then Porter Wagner held out a rhinestone hand. A TV show, a paycheck, a country. After years of being treated like a joke, it felt like rescue. It was also the beginning of a 7-year leash. She stepped into his light with a smile that hid the child who still flinched. America fell in love with the pair. What she did not know yet is the oldest Nashville trick of all. The man who pulls you into the spotlight is often the same man who decides how much of you is allowed to stay there. Chapter 3. The hand that lifted her also closed. The paycheck arrived. The cameras arrived. America learned her face the way it learns a weather girl or a hymn, weekly, familiar, almost family. Standing beside Porter Wagner in 1967 felt like the first room in her life that had enough light. After ketchup packets and slammed doors, a syndicated television show was not a job. It was proof she had not been crazy to board that bus. Then the light revealed its price. Porter did not only share a stage. He managed the career, the bookings, the sessions, the silhouette she was allowed to present, what she wore, what she sang, how high the hair could go and still belong to his brand. The contract she had signed in gratitude wrapped around her for years she did not yet know how to count. When she brought him a song that had come from the private room of her life, he often set it aside and pointed her toward his choice. He treated me like I was his property, she said long after the rhinestones had cooled. He didn't see me as an artist. He saw me as an extension of his brand. 7 years is a long time to be grateful and drowning at the same time. Backstage, the arguments left scorch marks. Rehearsals filled with a silence that was louder than shouting. Charm and generosity could turn, without warning, into a reminder sharpened into a blade. Without him, she would be nothing. She had arrived with $20. He had given her a country. The debt became a weapon, and she felt it every time she reached for her own voice. At night, when the show makeup came off and the apartment went quiet, she kept writing the songs he would never greenlight. One of them refused to dress itself as a love song, though the world would later play it at weddings and funerals and think it understood. I Will Always Love You was a goodbye wearing a velvet glove. Thank you for the door. I cannot live in your house. In 1974, she walked into his office with her hands unsteady and sang it to him with a guitar that suddenly felt too small for the room. Porter listened. When the last note ended, there were tears in his eyes. Even he could not pretend the song was ordinary. He let her go, and then he named the ransom. She did not have the money. She borrowed, scraped, hollowed out whatever future she could pawn, and bought her own career back from the man who had introduced it to the nation. I will always be grateful to Porter, she said later, voice soft and unyielding at once. But I will also never forget what it cost me to break free. Freedom, the industry whispered, was a pretty word for career suicide. No manager, debt like a second shadow, predictions that she would fade the moment the spotlight stopped belonging to someone else's show. They were wrong in the way powerful rooms are often wrong, loudly and too early. She took the farewell song and released it as her own. In 1974, I Will Always Love You went to #1 on the country chart and stayed, not as a stunt, but as a woman reclaiming the sound of her own leaving. Jolene, already burning it through 1973, had shown the other face of her gift. Jealousy and fragile beauty written so cleanly it still feels like overhearing a prayer you were not meant to hear. Here You Come Again in 1977 crossed the border into pop and proved the mountain could travel. In 1980, 9 to 5 became something rarer than a hit. It became a shared nerve. Written for the film she starred in with Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, the song went #1 country and pop, sold more than 1 million copies, and carried her all the way to an Academy Award nomination. The girl once told she was too country, too much, too high, too cheap-looking, was suddenly everywhere the culture kept its mirrors. She built a production company and took control of the one thing Nashville prefers artists not to notice until it is too late. The masters, the publishing, the paper that outlives applause. When Whitney Houston later covered I Will Always Love You for The Bodyguard and turned it into one of the best-selling singles on earth, the royalty river ran toward the woman they had called a dumb blonde. The costume had been a strategy. The contracts were the quiet revenge. In 1986, she opened Dollywood in the same mountains that had once iced the inside of her windows. Critics called it a vanity project, a singer playing theme park owner. She knew what they did not. People would not come only for rides. They would come to walk through a story that made poverty look survivable. The park grew into one of the country's great destinations. Millions of visitors a year, the largest employer in a region that had been easy to forget. I wanted to bring jobs back to my people, she said, as if it were simple arithmetic instead of a homecoming with a cash register. The pace that built the empire also began to eat the woman inside it. By the early 1980s, she was on every cover that would have her, every stage that could hold a sequin, every interview that wanted the laugh and not the cost. She later admitted she was running herself into the ground because stopping felt like vanishing. Behind the smile that America trusted, she was exhausted, anxious, and losing the argument with her own mind. Success by every public measure. Inside, empty. Worthless. A fog so complete she could not see a way forward. She has spoken of that season only in fragments, and the fragments are enough. There was a day dark enough that she considered not continuing. What pulled her back was not a speech or a chart position. A small dog ran into the room, tail going, eyes convinced she was the entire world. If she disappeared, who would take care of him? Who would notice the absence before the headlines did? It was not a miracle. It was a thread. Depression does not leave because an animal loves you. She sought help, therapy, medication, the few people she could stand to be unperformed in front of, and began the slow, unphotogenic work of rebuilding a self the industry had no use for. Carl Thomas. Dean had been there since the first day in Nashville, a quiet man she met outside a laundromat when she was 18 and still carrying the mountain in her suitcase. They married on May 30th, 1966. He hated the spotlight the way she had once hated being poor. On principle, with his whole body. He did not attend the awards. He did not collect the rooms. He ran an asphalt business and kept a life that did not require applause. In the collapse, he did not try to fix her into a more convenient shape. He stayed. In a world that wanted pieces of Dolly Parton, Carl wanted her to come home. Carl saved my life in ways he'll never fully understand, she said. He didn't try to fix me. He just loved me, and that was enough. Enough, however, is not the same as healed. She learned she could be strong and still break. She learned breaking was not a scandal. It was evidence she was still human under the wig. She went back to work because work had always been both medicine and poison, purpose and the excuse not to sit still with the whole. The albums continued. The films continued. Dollywood widened. The smile returned to its public post. What did not return was the illusion that fame could cauterize a childhood, a contract, or a night when a dog had to do the job a whole industry never learned how to do. She had bought her freedom. She had not yet learned what freedom would charge her next. Chapter 4. It costs a lot of money to look this cheap. The world thought it had solved her. Hair, rhinestones, a body treated like public property, an accent ripe for imitation. For decades, Dolly Parton was discussed as a look, not a writer. Late night made her a punchline. Tabloids measured her. Nashville handled her like a novelty who could sell tickets. People see the hair and the boobs, and they think that's all there is, she said. They don't see the songwriter. They don't see the businesswoman. They just see the costume. The costume was strategy. A poor girl learns that looking like a joke can be safer than looking like a threat. It costs a lot of money to look this cheap. The room laughed. Under the laugh was a woman billing the same people who once told her to go home. Women cut her too. Some called the glitter a surrender to the male gaze. She answered with a blade and a joke. I'm not offended by dumb blonde jokes because I'm not dumb and I'm not blonde. When Here You Come Again crossed into pop, country purists called her a sellout. Stations refused the record. Too country, then not country enough. The rumors went lower. Carl Dean almost never appeared in public, so gossip decided the marriage was fake or cover. She drew the only line she still owned. My private life is mine, and I'm not giving it to you. The 1990s made it physical. Grief and work changed her body. Headlines treated weight as failure. Cameras sold the unkind frame. She later said she ate to fill a hollow no chart could reach. I was hurting, and the world saw my hurt and turned it into entertainment. She got healthier for herself, then armored up again. If something sagged, she would have it fixed. You can't let people see you cry because if they see you cry, they win. Offices were quieter knives. Labels steered the sound. Partners assumed the blonde act meant she could not read a contract. She had already been owned once. She kept the publishing. When Whitney Houston turned I Will Always Love You, her goodbye to Porter, into a global monument, the money ran to the woman they called too simple to last. Vindication is not peace. The old voices still found her. Not smart enough, not serious enough, not real enough. You carry those wounds forever, she said. You learn to walk with them. Fame could buy Dollywood. It could not buy a seat at the bedside still waiting in Tennessee. Chapter 5. The people who left before she could get home. She never had a child of her own. That absence sat in her life like a room she learned not to open in interviews. What she did have was a family of 12, a whole weather system of brothers and sisters who had shared the cabin, the quilts, the shame, the songs. That world thinned, one name at a time, while she was almost always somewhere else. A stage, a studio, a press line, too far to take a hand. The first hole opened when she was 9. Larry lived 4 days in 1955. A.V. Lee had assigned each new baby to an older sibling. This one was meant to be Dolly's to rock. The infant's death went into the marrow of Coat of Many Colors, a grief small enough to miss on a timeline and large enough to last a lifetime. Robert Lee Parton died in 2000, a man weathered down by fields and silence. She had bought her parents comfort they had never owned. She had become the proof that the mountain could be escaped. What she still waited for was a sentence he did not easily give. "I'm proud of you." She believed he loved her. She also died still hungry for the sound of it. A.V. Lee followed in 2003. "She was my everything," Dolly said. "When she died, a part of me died too." The woman who had fed children with ballads was the last gravity. After that, the famous smile had to do the work of a foundation. Floyd, the songwriter brother who shared rockin' years with her, died in 2018 at 61. She was performing when the news reached her. She finished the show. That is what Dolly did. Then the private collapse arrived backstage where the audience could not cash it in. Randy died of cancer in 2021 at 67. David in 2024 at 82. Coy Denver, her older brother, died on July 23, 2026, not 5 weeks before she would follow him. Kenny Rogers, the rare friend who had been real in an industry of arrangements, died in 2020 in the sealed-off season of the pandemic. She could not attend the funeral. She mourned him on a screen and cried on camera because there was no other door left to walk through. Every goodbye had the same cruel shape. The career that saved her kept her absent from the rooms where saving was no longer possible. Chapter 6: The Hole That Would Not Fill. Carl Thomas Dean died in Nashville on March 3, 2025. He was 82. Nearly 59 years of a marriage the public barely saw. No red carpets, no Grammys in his pocket. Only the house she came home to when the sequence came off. "Words can't do justice to the love we shared for over 60 years, she wrote. 3 days later, she released "If You Hadn't Been There" and put his name on the only monument she trusted, a song. To the Today Show, she said the loss was a huge adjustment. She would be all right. She would always miss him. She would always love him. Then her body began to collect the bills she had postponed for decades. The old rule that stopping meant disappearing. In September 2025, she postponed a Las Vegas residency for medical procedures. In October, she had to look into a camera and say, "I ain't dead yet," because the rumor mill had gotten ahead of her pulse. In May 2026, she canceled the residency altogether. Kidney stones, an immune system, and a digestive system she described as having gone all out of whack. In late June, she made her last public appearance, cutting a ribbon at Dolly's Tennessean travel stop. By mid-August, she could only arrive at Dollywood by video, dizzy, dehydrated, still trying to keep the park's new ride from opening without her voice. On August 21, 2026, the same Friday she was admitted to Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center, she told people she was dealing with health she had not watched while she was watching over Carl. She mentioned the women's health collapse of the early 80s, as if to say this was not her first dark hallway. Then she did the most Dolly thing left. She talked about work, still healing, still working. Avatar shows in Nashville. So many things unfinished. 4 days later, on August 25th, her nephew Brian Seaver, family and for more than 20 years, the man who guarded her, read the statement she had asked him to prepare years earlier, back when dying was still a hypothetical. She had lived in the light, he said. She was in the arms of Jesus, met by Carl, by her parents, by everyone who had been waiting. Team Dolly confirmed a brief battle with cancer. The type was never named. She died surrounded by the people who were allowed past the wig. The funeral was small, as she wanted. She was laid beside Carl at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Nashville, on a crypt that had already carried both names since his death, etched with the cabin of her childhood and the house of his. Seaver said she had asked to rest in cotton after a lifetime of heavy rhinestones. For once, the outfit could be soft. Dolly would open the next morning. The park used the sentence she had lived by: "The show must go on." She was never supposed to make it. Too poor, too country, too much hair, too much sparkle, too much mountain in the mouth. She turned poverty into coat of many colors. She turned a contract into "I will always love you." She turned mockery into a brand nobody else could wear. She turned pain into 200 million books in the hands of children who never met her, and a quiet $1 million in 2020 into research that helped a vaccine leave the lab. She could not turn loss into something that leaves. She could not make childlessness stop aching. She could not make absence at a deathbed feel like attendance. She could not make the years she spent ignoring her own body, while Carl suffered, into more time. The tragedy at 80 is not that Dolly Parton died. It is that she died still asking for one more day to finish what she had promised the Ridge, the children, and the barefoot girl who boarded a bus with $20 and a refusal to drown. A child somewhere will open an imagination library book with her name on it, and she will not be here to see it. That was the monument she chose. Not marble, not rhinestones on a grave. A poor kid who does not have to be ashamed of empty shelves. If this story stayed with you, not because she was famous, but because the bill was real, leave a like, send it to someone who is tired, and keep the only math she trusted. You are not what life takes. You are what you give back. She gave back more than the world handed her. And this time, at last, she was allowed to rest. Subscribe for the lives behind the legends, not the polished version, the one with the scar still in it.